Hey there, welcome. Tonight, we're going to do something a little unusual. We're going to wander through the rainy streets of ancient Rome, not chasing emperors or gladiators, but slipping quietly into humble shops and narrow lanes to see how ordinary Romans spent long gray days when the skies refused to clear. You'll meet candlemakers worrying over slow-setting wicks, children racing little boats through gutter streams, scribes guarding damp scrolls, all the small lives that truly held the empire together. If these calm, winding histories help you unwind, would you mind giving this video a gentle like? Maybe tell me in the comments where or when you're listening from. I always love seeing who's sharing these slow moments. Alright, find your softest pillow, pull up a blanket, and let's drift back to Rome. Just as the rain begins to fall, you stand just off a narrow Roman alleyway, rain gently pattering on the tiled roofs above, forming tiny waterfalls off the eaves. The stones beneath your sandals are slick, each step accompanied by a quiet splash that seeps through to your toes. You're on your way to the Falonica, the bustling laundries that give the district its pungent, sour tang even on dry days. But today, the smell is sharper, almost alive. The vats that usually bubble with stale urine and alkaline clay are brimming dangerously high, frothing with rainwater that's washed down from every rooftop, every awning carrying dust, bird droppings, and bits of leaves. You wrinkle your nose. The washerwomen's sturdy, broad-shouldered aprons soaked through mutter curses as they struggle to keep the water from diluting their precious mixtures. You pause under a cracked archway, watching them, their hands already raw from hours of plunging garments into harsh solutions, now slip on sodden wool. One woman steadies herself on the edge of a vat with a sigh that carries more exhaustion than the murmur of the rain. The cloths they haul out slap wetly against the stones, heavier than usual. It will take so much longer for these to dry. In the distance, you hear the hollow call of a horn, a delivery of new amphorae perhaps, but no one rushes to meet it. In weather like this, commerce slows. The carts that do come through leave deep ruts in the mud, pooling into little lakes by the afternoon. You wander deeper inside. The Falonica is dim, lit only by small clay lamps that sputter against the damp air. Here, rows of garments hang limply from ropes. Whites are tinged gray by the humidity, colors dulled. You notice a thin stream of water trickling along the floor, winding its way around the washerwomen's sandaled feet. You there watch your step, one of them calls. It's slippery enough to break a leg, and who would pay the doctor's fee for that? Her grin is weary but good-natured, a small relief in the heavy air. Outside, the rain grows steadier, heavier. You can hear it drumming on the tiles, gurgling through gutters. You imagine it rushing through the underground channels the Romans so cleverly built, or so they boast. Even their famed drainage struggles when the skies open like this. A boy bursts in through the doorway, breathless, a small basket clutched in one hand. His tunic clings to him. He glances nervously at the vats, nearly overflowing. My mother's dress, is it ready yet? The washerwoman shakes her head, droplets flying from the edge of her kerchief. Too damp to press, lad. Come tomorrow. He looks disappointed but nods, turning to dash back into the wet streets. Perhaps his mother has a feast tonight, you think, and will have to appear in last month's tunic instead. These small domestic inconveniences, they must have made up the true heart of ancient frustration, more than war or politics ever did. You step outside again. The rain is steady now, pooling in your footprints, flowing in lazy streams toward the nearest drain. You think of the countless small choices people make on days like this, postponing errands, leaving the market stalls half-stocked, delaying a short visit to a neighbor. All because the sky decided to open. How much of history, you wonder, was quietly decided by days just like this one? You glance back at the washerwomen, still bent over their frothy vats, muttering complaints to the indifferent rain. Would their lives have been any different if the sun had shone today? Would these dresses, these tunics, be halfway to some merchant's villa by now, admired over a midday meal? Or would the real change be smaller, harder to trace, in a delayed meeting, an avoided slip, a dress that arrived too late to impress a hopeful suitor? And how many of the grand stories you've read of senatorial decrees, of legionary marches turned ever so slightly because someone's tunic didn't dry on a rainy Roman day? You linger by the doorway of the Fulanica longer than you planned. The rain has deepened into a steady chorus on the tiles above, echoing in the narrow streets. The washerwomen are too absorbed in their toil to shoo you off. Instead, they work around you, weaving like patient beasts of burden, voices low, roughened by lie and long hours. One woman, older than the others, with hands as creased and weathered as dry figs, is pulling a tunic from a vat so heavy with rain-swollen suds that she grunts under the strain. Drops slip down her wrists, under her sleeves. Without looking up, she starts to hum an old tune, something lilting, almost cheerful, though it catches oddly in the damp air. You'd not know it, but that one was married to a wine cellar once. A younger washerwoman whispers, sidling closer to you with a conspiratorial grin. He ran off with a silk merchant's daughter, left her nothing but debts and a few cracked amphorae. Now she sings to keep the ghosts quiet, or so they say. You nod, unsure how to respond. These details, so small, so painfully personal, hang in the steam like hidden histories, known only to the stones and the washerwomen. You imagine how many stories like this are scrubbed into these stones, how many heartbreaks were carried in on tunics to be washed clean. A loud splash draws your attention. The old woman has accidentally dropped the tunic back into the vat, sending a wave of soapy water over the rim. It splashes across the floor, catching the hem of your garment. You glance down. Mud, soap, and rain, your own little patch of history. Now blending with countless others in this place, it'll dry, the old woman mutters, her eyes finally meeting yours. They are sharp, still bright, despite the years. Everything dries, in the end, even hearts, if you wait long enough. She turns back to her work, and the younger washerwoman gives a little nervous laugh. The others say nothing, each woman lost in her own rhythm of plunging, scrubbing, wringing. You can hear the gentle slap of wet cloth against stone, the occasional grunt or hiss as a muscle strains. Outside, the street has grown quieter, fewer footsteps, fewer wheels creaking by. The rain has scared many indoors. A pair of boys dart past the archway, chasing a little boat made from a scrap of bark. Their laughter fades quickly down the winding street. The older washerwoman looks up again. It's days like this the memories slip out easier, she says, almost to herself. We tell stories to keep from going mad with the cold. A heavier woman nearby snorts. Your stories, old crow, are just a way to keep us from remembering how sore our backs are. Maybe, the elder concedes. Then she sighs, resting her hands on the rim of the vat. Her fingers are pale and puckered. But I once washed the robe of a senator's wife, you know. Rich purple, it was ruined by some foolish servant letting it drag in the mud. She wept when she brought it to me, as if her whole life was bound up in that stain. And was it? You ask softly, surprised by your own voice. The woman studies you, head tilted. Perhaps, perhaps not. But 2 weeks later, her husband cast her off, married some prettier thing from Neapolis. I always wondered if he'd found fault first in her robe, then in her soul. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the rain. How fragile it all is. The thread between standing proud in the forum and standing shamed outside a lover's door. Could a rainy day, a careless servant, really unravel a future so thoroughly? A sudden gust sends droplets skittering across the floor. One of the women hurries to close a wooden shutter that has rattled loose, but the damage is done. The line of water on the floor has found a new tributary, winding its way toward a stack of baskets full of folded linen. There's a scramble, a half-dozen hands snatching up the baskets before the water can soak through. They laugh then, a quick, sharp relief that sounds almost like girls at a festival. You smile, despite yourself. Even here, in this dim place of damp walls and harsher chemicals, moments of life bloom, unexpected, as moss in the cracks of stone. The younger washerwoman who first whispered to you draws closer again. You've never washed linen for the dead, have you? She asks. Her eyes are wide, searching yours for something. No, you admit. She shivers, though it's warm enough from the steam. It's colder work, somehow. The cloth knows. Doesn't soak the same, doesn't wring out right. It's like squeezing tears from a stone. A sudden silence falls over the room. The others slow their work, as if remembering. Then, almost as if to banish the hush, the older washerwoman begins humming again. It's the same tune, but softer now, less jaunty. A sort of lullaby for tired bodies, tired souls. You lean against the wall, feeling the damp seep through. Above, water trickles through a crack in the ceiling, drips steadily into a small puddle by your feet. Each drop feels like a quiet punctuation in a story far longer than yours. How many generations have stood just here, feet damp, hearts burdened by small tragedies? You look out at the rain, still falling in calm sheets. You wonder, in all these lives, intertwined by soap and sorrow, by mud and minor miracles, how many stories will be entirely washed away by time, and which ones will cling stubbornly, like stains that refuse to lift? You stay with the washerwomen until the afternoon light has turned a dim, pearly gray, and the rain has settled into a steady murmur, almost like distant applause. The Follonica is quieter now. The early urgency to scrub, to beat out the dirt, to keep the vats from spilling, has given way to a slower, resigned pace. The older washerwoman wraps her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her arms still slick and dotted with pale soap bubbles. Her hums have dwindled into mere breath. Nearby, the younger woman who confessed her fear of washing shrouds for the dead now stoops over a bundle of tunics. Her arms tremble with effort. Every so often, a customer appears in the doorway, pulling a cloak tighter around their shoulders. They shout half-hearted greetings into the steam, and the washerwomen sigh. Coins change hands. Damp garments are handed over. Promises of better weather tomorrow, offered with the thin hopefulness of people who've lived long enough to distrust the sky. A small, stooped man arrives to collect his household's laundry. He carries a satchel already bulging with bread and wilted greens from the market. His eyes dart around the room, resting briefly on you before sliding away, perhaps wondering if you are some minor official sent to count taxes, or merely another idle Roman listening to stories. Because there's nothing else to do on a day like this, the older washerwoman greets him by name. Your master's tunic'll still be a little damp, Quintus. The air won't give us more than this today. He nods with an expression halfway between annoyance and acceptance. So long as there's no fresh stains, Domina won't have my head. She hands him the neatly folded stack with practiced care. A few droplets fall from the edge, as he tucks them into his satchel. He pays not quite enough for the amount of work done, and hurries out again into the drizzle. Always short by a sestertius, that one, the younger woman mutters, but she says it with the same tired fondness you've heard from your own mother, complaining of neighbors who borrowed oil and never paid it back. In these small grievances lie the 1,000 invisible ties that keep a city bound together. A little later, with the room empty again, save for you and the workers, the older washerwoman stretches her back with a faint groan. You know, she says, not quite to anyone, some days I dream of a villa by the sea. No vats, no lye, no tunics stained by careless dinners. The others laugh softly. You'd last a week, says one. Then you'd miss your stories. Or miss cursing the weather, maybe. Her eyes grow distant. She doesn't bother brushing it away. She returns to sorting a pile of garments by color. Whites here, pale saffrons there, deeper hues on a separate bench to avoid bleeding. Even in their tiny domain, there's order, rules, systems that keep chaos at bay. By soap and soaked in rainwater are what kept Roman life turning day by day. A senator might make law, a general might win battles, but who made sure his toga didn't smell of mildew when he paraded through the forum? Who cleaned the sweat and blood from a tunic after a night of drunken revelry, or worse? Outside, you hear a cart trundle by wheels, sending up small waves through the street's shallow flood. A mule brays miserably, pauses at the doorway, peering out into the silver-streaked world beyond. Her breath clouds in the cooler air. We'll close early if it doesn't let up, she says, over her shoulder. Else tomorrow we'll be wringing water from our beds, too. A few of the others nod eagerly. One woman rubs her arms, looking longingly toward where she surely hopes a warm hearth waits. You wonder what each will return to. A husband who spent his afternoon at a tavern, or an empty room, silent but for the rain tapping on the shutters. The younger washerwoman who spoke to you most lingers by your side. She watches her elder with an expression somewhere between admiration and dread. She's worked here since before I was born, she says quietly. Knows the stain of every family in this district. Who has money, who hasn't, who drinks too much, who loves too many. Do they pay her for those stories, you ask? Lightly, she shakes her head, smiling, though there's no mirth in it. No, but maybe it's the only real wage she gets, knowing everything, carrying it all like a basket on her head. As the washerwomen begin to tidy the day's chaos, bundling used cloths for tomorrow's wringing, for future telling, the older woman gives you a long look, not unfriendly, but measured, like she's etching your face into some ledger kept behind her eyes. When she finally speaks, remember this if you write about us, stranger. Rome stands on clean tunics and whispered sins. You'd be surprised how much of empire's weight rests on tired shoulders like ours. Then she gives a little nod, as if dismissing a customer, and turns back to oversee the last chores of the day. You step back out into the narrow street. A balcony overhead, a woman shakes out a mat, sending tiny rivers cascading down. The washerwomen's phallonica fades behind you. Just another shadowy doorway in a city filled with stories. You wonder, centuries from now, when someone brushes dirt from old stones and finds a scrap of dyed wool, will they understand the lives it touched? Will they think of the old woman with her cracked hands, humming to keep her heart from breaking? Or will they imagine only the senators and soldiers, missing the quiet foundation entirely? And isn't it possible that the truly important history of Rome, the one that explains how such a vast city kept beating, was written most deeply in places exactly like this? Made sure 1,000 tunics were ready for the dawn. You find yourself standing at the edge of a carefully tended garden, on Rome's Aventine hill. The rain has softened to a fine, steady veil, turning the marble pathways slick and darkening the green of hedges until they seem almost black. You can smell crushed rosemary underfoot, mingling with the faint bitterness of damp stone. Overhead, water collects on the wide leaves of laurel trees, then drips in fat drops that patter against your shoulders and neck. This is the private refuge of, though few truly know him. You are here as a quiet observer, almost an intruder, though in this retelling, you're also part of the silence. Statuary with oiled cloth. Usually, this garden would be busy, even on a damp afternoon. Clients waiting for patronage, careful to mirror the senator's tastes. But today, the rain has kept them away, and the garden stands empty, except for Lucius himself. He sits on a stone bench. At first glance, he might seem simply pensive, taking in the subtle charm of water dripping from one marble urn into another. But if you watch closely, you notice his foot tapping against the gravel, an anxious, tiny betrayal of his practiced calm. The garden slaves hover near the columns, uncertain whether to fetch fresh cushions, whether to light the braziers against the damp. One finally steps forward with a small bronze brazier already glowing, setting it carefully at the senator's feet. A wisp of smoke curls upward, merging with the cool mist. Lucius does not thank him. Instead, he leans forward, elbows on knees, staring at the twisting tendrils of smoke. You wonder if he even sees the garden anymore, or if he is mentally pacing through Senate halls, weighing the cost of alliances. The sting of rivalries left unresolved. At the far end of the courtyard stands a pergola draped with grapevines now, battered by the rain. Under it waits an elderly Greek tutor, head bowed, holding a scroll that likely contains some elegant speech draft. He clears his throat twice, a polite little cough that fails to pierce the senator's fog of thought. Finally, he shuffles off, sandals scuffing on the wet path. You step a bit closer, drawn by the almost oppressive hush. The only sounds are the soft dripping of rain and an occasional flutter as a thrush startles from one drenched bush to another. You catch a flash of dull brown feathers, like a fleeting thought, too quick to grasp. Beneath the silence, you sense layers of hidden narratives. Perhaps Lucius received a letter this morning, one whose contents now gnaw at him in a way no public rebuke ever could. Perhaps a promised vote in the Senate has failed to materialize. Or perhaps worse, an ally has hinted at betrayal, leaving him to rebuild fragile webs of favor under the smothering weight of Roman pride. It is easy, standing here in the muted rain, to forget the vast machinery of empire that thrums beyond these walls. Easy to overlook the soldiers stationed at distant borders, the caravans inching across treacherous mountain passes. Yet all of that somehow rests on small gardens like this. Their pale feathers are quickly soaked, sticking close to narrow bodies, and they look vaguely ridiculous, tiny bundles of fluff huddling against Roman marble. You almost smile. Lucius doesn't notice. His gaze is fixed on the damp flagstones, on nothing in particular. Eventually, a young servant approaches, head bowed, carefully balancing a tray with a shallow bowl of hot wine steeped with honey and cloves. He sets it on a low table near the senator, waiting for permission to retreat. Lucius waves a hand without looking up. When the boy scurries away, Lucius finally moves. Would claim it's the chill of the afternoon, but there's a fragility to the motion that suggests deeper unrest. As he lifts the wine, he pauses, catching sight of his own reflection in the rippling surface. It seems to surprise him, as if he didn't expect to find himself there at all. He lowers the bowl without drinking. The rain increases, sending tiny streams racing along the garden's gentle inclines toward hidden drains. You realize how cleverly this place is built. Even beauty here serves function, guiding water so that roots drink but foundations remain safe. Perhaps Rome's real genius lies not in her legions or laws, but in such mundane triumphs, gardens that endure seasons of storm without crumbling. A thought stirs in you. How many decisions that shaped provinces and ruined families were made by men sitting alone like this, in gardens meant for quiet contemplation, but haunted instead by fears. Perhaps it was never the grand speeches that mattered most, but these small, private moments, when uncertainty pooled heavier than any rain. You take one last look at Lucius, still hunched on his mossy bench, brow furrowed as though wrestling ghosts. Then you turn your gaze outward, past the columns, to the soaked avenue beyond. Somewhere out there, merchants haggle under dripping awnings. Children chase each other through puddles. Soldiers trudge past with shields wrapped in leather to keep the iron from rusting. Life continues, heedless of senatorial doubts, and you wonder, does the empire's vast pulse truly flow through marble halls, or through quiet gardens where anxious men drink cold wine under a gray sky, trying to decide tomorrow for everyone else? The rain does not relent. It continues its delicate assault on the garden, as though determined to wash the bright mosaics pale and pound the fragrant herbs into silence. You remain under the narrow overhang of a colonnade, close enough to catch the scent of wet stone, far enough to stay mostly dry. Lucius sits as you left him, the bowl of spiced wine untouched on the low table. The steam has thinned 2 weak wandering threads that vanish before they rise, a hand's breadth. His eyes are distant. From here, you can almost hear the slow grind of thoughts he'd rather not entertain than the quiet breaks, soft footfalls approach along the polished walkway, muffled by damp sandals. Through the rain-veiled archway appears a figure draped in a travel-stained cloak pulled tightly against the weather. A servant hovers nearby, hesitant to announce a guest uninvited to this private gloom. Lucius glances up, irritation flickering over his face. But when the newcomer pushes back the hood, rainwater cascading in silver ribbons to the ground, the senator's expression shifts. A mix of surprise and wariness replaces the frown. Without a word, he gestures to the servant to stand aside. The visitor steps closer, shaking droplets from his sleeves. You take him in, perhaps late 30s, hair curled tightly at the nape, despite the damp eyes, sharp even under low lids. His mouth is quick to curl, but it's not quite a smile. You see something of both calculation and plea there. He does not bow deeply, merely inclines his head. Lucius Fabius, I trust I don't overstep, calling on you unannounced. Lucius's reply, if delayed, it must be urgent, Marcus. If it drags you through such rain, urgent enough. Marcus glances at the garden, his gaze flickering, across dripping vines and puddled marble. But private matters often wait for foul weather, do they not? Fewer ears to pry. They stand awkwardly for a breath. Then Lucius motions him to a nearby bench. Servants bring another brazier, though the coals are meager, fuel is costly, and even senators must mind their household's expenses if debts grow. The two men sit opposite each other, separated by a low table that catches rain in small starbursts. For a while, neither speaks. They listen instead to the soft hiss of rain against burning coals, the faint sound of water flowing somewhere beneath their feet through Rome's hidden arteries of clay, pipe, and stone conduit. Finally, Marcus leans forward. You've heard about the land dispute in Campania, the one with Cecilius' widow refusing to sell. Lucius's fingers drum lightly. On the bench, a small, betraying rhythm, I've heard. I had hoped the matter would resolve itself, as did we all. But her stubbornness grows, even as her orchards decline. She's courting favor from unexpected quarters now. Men who'd like to see your influence wane. Influence waning means contracts lost, votes slipping away in the Senate. It means young relatives failing to secure their military posts. Household ventures floundering without the soft cushion of political favor. Lucius's reply is little more than a sigh. And what would you have me do? Press her more openly. The optics of a senator's hand forcing a grieving woman are unpalatable, even in our forgiving climate. Marcus makes a dismissive noise. Unpalatable, yes, but necessary, or else. Your next proposal in the Curia will lack the voices you've always relied on. Men who are now being courted by the very people standing behind her defiance. A pause. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a dog barks once, sharp and hollow. Then silence falls again. You watch a drop gather at the edge of Lucius's cloak, hang trembling, then fall to vanish among the tiny puddles. You misunderstand me if you think I relish this, Lucius says finally, voice low. Do you imagine I built my life to be threatened by a farmer's widow? Or that I care so little for my name's dignity that I would bully her outright? Marcus only lifts his shoulders in a shallow shrug. I imagine you care more for your son's futures than for a rumor or two that might fade by next season. A fortune can recover from scandal. It rarely recovers from lost land. There it is, the truth laid bare in the cold, wet air. You study Lucius's face, watch the tightening at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps he sees his eldest boy no more than 17, practicing declamations under a tutor's strict eye, and imagines that future slipping, that carefully groomed path toward praetorship dissolving into service under some other man's banner, forced to curry favor rather than dispense it, for all Rome's grandeur, heavy with the weight of small fears that bloom into monumental shifts. Marcus rises. He doesn't press further. His message is planted like a seed, certain to sprout under the senator's troubled gaze. I'll leave you to your contemplations, but remember, fortune favors the bold, Lucius. Even when the bold must tread over inconvenient hearts. He adjusts his cloak, drawing the wet fabric close again, and slips away with a rustle of sandals on stone. The garden seems to sigh as he goes, relieved or resigned, you can't decide which. Lucius sits alone again. The brazier's embers crackle, softly, struggling against the damp. He does not move to call another servant. Instead, he leans back, eyes tracing the rain's endless descent from leaf to path. You wonder what he will do. Send quiet word to force the widow's hand through legal pressure. Have her tenants hounded until her profits vanish, compelling a desperate sale. Or will he gamble that this storm will pass, that alliances will hold, even if he chooses caution over cruelty? The rain falls on, unbothered by mortal dilemmas. It pools in delicate patterns on the table's inlaid stones, tiny mirrored worlds that shiver with each drop. And you wonder, how often were Rome's greatest shifts, her wars declared, her alliances broken, truly born, not in the roar of the forum, but in gardens like this. Night descends slowly over Rome, a damp veil that deepens shadows under arches and turns the streets into winding rivers of glistening stone. The rain has eased at last to a fine mist that clings to skin and hair. Yet the garden of Lucius Fabius, Marcellus feels no warmer for it. Lamps have been lit along the walkway, small terracotta bowls of oil and floating wicks that tremble with each breath of air. You stand at the edge, half hidden behind a slender column wrapped with ivy. From here you watch Lucius, still seated on his mossy bench, the wool of his cloak pulled tight, eyes reflecting lamplight in two uncertain glimmers. A servant approaches at last, a boy no more than 14, his tunic hitched up with a cord too large for his narrow waist. He bears a small tablet and stylus, head ducked in submission. "Dominus," he says softly. The steward asks if you will give instructions. He worries the clerks will not know how to proceed without your hand. Lucius takes a slow breath, as if pulling the wet air deeper might lend him resolve. Then he nods. "Fetch Cassius. Tell him I will see him here." The boy bows and scurries off into the dark recess of the villa. Sandals smacking faintly on wet tile. Cassis arrives not long after. He is a heavy-set man, middle-aged, shoulders stooped more from years of ledger-keeping than from physical labor. In one hand he clutches a long strip of waxed tablet, in the other a stylus that taps nervously against his palm. "You wished to see me, Dominus." Lucius's gaze is on the little streams that still wind their way through the garden, silver threads under lamplight. He seems reluctant to break the hush that has wrapped around them like a damp shroud. At last, he says, "There is a matter. In Campania, the widow of Gaius Caecilius grows troublesome. Her lands are needed, quietly, but soon." Cassius's eyes flicker once a quick calculation, and he nods. "Discreet pressure on her creditors, perhaps. We can remind the local magistrates of their loyalties. Some overdue taxes might be reassessed." Lucius flinches, almost imperceptibly, but he does not revoke the order. "See it done? I would have it resolved before the next festival." Cassius makes a small bow. "As you wish, Dominus." Rome stands on such necessities. That phrase, so bland, so well worn, hangs between them for a long moment. Then Cassius turns, disappearing back into the villa with a rustle of damp tunic. You're left alone with Lucius once more. He exhales a long breath, the kind that deflates the shoulders, that seems to empty something deeper than lungs. His hand hovers over the bowl of wine, still sitting on the table where it has long gone cold. He draws it close at last, sips, grimaces at the chill. It is no comfort now, only a bitter reminder of time past. You watch his eyes drift to the faint outlines of his garden statues, a stoic Minerva, a playful Dionysus, their marble faces streaked with moisture that might almost be tears. Perhaps Lucius imagines them whispering judgments. Or perhaps they offer only the same indifferent silence as the rain. A rustling by the entrance catches your ear. You turn to see Lucius's eldest son, Publius, hovering at the edge of the lamplight, barely 17, clad in a new toga that looks slightly too large across the shoulders. His cheeks still bear the softness of youth, though his eyes try for the hard calm of men twice his years. "Father," Publius says with careful formality, "Mother wondered if you would join us for the evening meal." Lucius considers him a long moment. "Tell her I will come shortly." Publius shifts, hesitates, then steps closer. "I overheard Cassius about the widow. Will it truly come to that? Her son is near my age." Lucius's jaw tightens. "It will, because if it does not, another family will do it to us first. That is how Rome works, Publius. A hand must press down, else it finds itself pressed." Publius looks stricken, but he nods. The fragile acceptance of someone who sees adulthood as a grim inevitability. He backs away, the torch he carries, bobbing like a small, trembling sun, and vanishes into the colonnade. Lucius closes his eyes. You sense he is listening, not to the garden, but to something within himself, some echo of honor he long thought dulled, now stirring uncomfortably. You wonder what promises he made to himself as a younger man, sitting in this same garden, to be just, to be wise, or simply to be powerful enough that the rains of fortune never left him. Drenched and shivering, a night breeze stirs the lamp flames. The garden sighs, 1,000 droplets pattering in tiny counterpoint on leaves and stone. Lucius rises at last, slowly, like a man bearing not only his own weight, but the invisible burdens of generations. He moves toward the villa, where warm lamplight spills from windows, where laughter rises, forced, perhaps, but human. At the threshold he pauses, one hand resting on the doorframe, eyes lingering on his garden one final time. It strikes you then how small this moment is in the grand story of Rome. No armies have marched, no laws were read aloud to cheering crowds. Yet, in this quiet garden, beneath meek rainfall, a decision was made that will ripple outward, driving a widow to desperation, shifting loyalties in Campania, perhaps nudging future Senate votes, just enough to start or stall a war. History is written in chronicles of conquest and oration, but truly, it is laid stone by stone in gardens like this, under gray skies, by men who weigh personal dread against public ambition, who sipped cold wine and quietly instruct others to shape or shatter the lives of strangers. And you wonder, if Rome was built on such moments, how many fragile hearts were crushed under her grand avenues, never noted in any scroll. How many more gardens heard whispered bargains that steered an empire, all while the rain fell, indifferent, on fig leaves and mossy stones. You stand at the corner of a bustling Roman crossroads, though bustling might be generous today. The rain has returned with a cold determination, pooling in every crease of the stone streets and flowing in slick little currents that weave around wagon wheels and dart past pedestrians' feet. You huddle beneath a narrow awning of an insula, one of the tall, precarious apartment buildings stacked like ambitions, rising 5, even 6 stories into the damp sky. Your gaze drifts across the street to a small taverna, a humble shop, front open to the thoroughfare, the wooden counter slick with drizzle despite the awning stretched above it. Behind the counter, a baker stands, sleeves rolled to the elbows, arms dusted in flour, turned to pale paste where the moisture has found it. His face bears the same mixture of patience and quiet worry you've seen etched into many tradesmen's features today. Inside, the shop is dark. Normally, on a fine day, the mouth of that oven would yawn bright and hungry, heat spilling out to warm the entire shop. Today, though, you notice the oven's door is only half open, the coals inside reluctant to fully catch in the damp air. A thin curl of smoke drifts upward, swallowed by shadows before it reaches the low, stained ceiling. A customer stands at the counter, one hand pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders, the other drumming fingers on the wet wood. "Marcus," he says, voice roughened by early hours, or perhaps by long habit, "my mistress will not wait. She'll take her bread, even if it's raw at the core." The baker, Marcus, apparently gives a weary half-bow. "I beg your patience, Gaius. The dough is slow to rise today. The ovens won't hold a proper heat with the air like this." Gaius scowls. "Then give it to me as it is. Better half-baked than a wife's wrath." He tosses a small purse onto the counter. It clinks with the modest music of copper coins. Marcus picks up a still pale loaf from a wooden tray, weighing it in his hand with clear reluctance before wrapping it in a bit of rough linen. The customer snatches it up and hurries back into the rain, leaving small, sharp-edged footprints on the wet stones. You step a little closer, drawn by the mingled scents, not the rich promise of warm bread you hoped for, but something earthier, less certain, damp ash, fermenting dough, a faint tang of wet straw from sacks stacked along the wall. Marcus catches your eye. You're welcome to stand out of the rain, though I've little to sell yet, he says, voice calm but edged with embarrassment. The gods laugh at bakers on days like this. Inside the shop, you see why. Near the oven's mouth, apprentices, by the looks of their ragged tunics and raw knuckles, squat on their haunches, fanning the coals with small woven mats. Every so often, one leans in to blow gently, cheeks puffed, only to cough as a swirl of smoke chokes him. Against another wall, shallow wicker baskets hold lumps of dough covered with damp cloths. They should be rising in gentle, rounded promises of tomorrow's sustenance. Instead, many sit nearly flat, sluggish in the cold. One apprentice lifts a corner of cloth and shakes his head with a sigh. Marcus wipes his floury hands on a stiff linen rag and moves to the baskets, pressing 2 fingers lightly into a mound. Not near ready, he mutters. Then, almost to himself, too much water in the air. The yeast grows lazy. Like old senators, they'll puff up best when the sun flatters them. You smile despite yourself at the image, the mighty rulers of Rome likened to lumps of dough, needing warm breezes and coddling to truly rise. Marcus doesn't notice. His eyes are on his loaves, his lips moving in silent calculations. How many customers might accept underdone bread? How many will storm off to a rival baker? Outside, the rain resumes in earnest, drumming on the awning, so hard you half expect it to tear. A woman trudges by with a basket balanced on her head, covered by a scrap of oilcloth. Water drips steadily down her back, unnoticed or simply endured. A few boys splash through a widening puddle, laughing in shrill voices that fade quickly into the mist. An older man appears in the doorway, then broad shoulders under a coarse cloak, silver bristling through his beard. Marcus stiffens at once. Domitius, a surprise to see you in person. The man grunts, stepping inside far enough to shake the worst of the water from his cloak. It spatters the floor in dark rosettes. I've had complaints from your usual customers. Say your bread's been sour, crust soft, underdone. Marcus lifts his hands in a placating gesture. This rain, it slows everything. I've kept the ovens burning as best I can. Even paid a neighbor for extra charcoal. Domitius's eyes narrow. That costs coin I've yet to see from you this month. A tight pause follows. You watch Marcus swallow. His hand twitches at his apron cord, then drops. I'll pay. I've still some orders from the bathhouses. They'll settle by Saturn's feast. Domitius snorts. They'd better, or your oven may cool for good, Marcus. With that, he turns and strides back into the wet street, cloak flaring behind him like a departing storm cloud. Marcus stands silent for a moment, staring at the space Domitius left behind. Then he sighs, scrubs a hand across his face, smearing flour into the lines at the corners of his eyes. One apprentice starts to speak, but Marcus shakes his head sharply. Back to your fans. If we're lucky, we'll have enough heat for the next batch by nightfall. You lean against a damp wooden beam, feeling the ancient chill seep through. Watching Marcus pace between oven and baskets, you sense the quiet desperation wound tight around his ribs. This is history too, not the grand feasts of emperors or the triumphal arches, but the small daily survival of a man trying to keep his hearth alive in the teeth of indifferent weather and sharper creditors. And you wonder, how often did the future of Rome hinge not on senatorial debates or legions abroad, but on rain that refused to let dough rise, on bread that failed to bake, on a baker's promise to pay before Saturn's feast. You remain by the doorway of Marcus's humble bakery, the smell of damp stone and cool ash filling your lungs. Outside, the rain continues its soft chorus on the awning above your head. masking distant noises, the rattle of a cart, a dog's solitary bark, the faint murmur of someone haggling under a dripping portico. Inside, though, the world feels narrowed to the quiet battle of flour, fire, and time. Marcus paces along the oven mouth. The apprentices redouble their efforts, taking turns blowing gently on the small orange glow deep within the dark oven. Each tries to coax the reluctant coals to life, cheeks hollowing with every careful breath. Their young faces shine with sweat despite the chill, foreheads streaked with soot and flour alike. At last, a thin tongue of flame licks up between the logs. One of the boys lets out a tiny gasp, then breaks into a grin. Marcus clamps a hand on his shoulder, a quick squeeze that says more than words. Good work, Lucius. Keep the door cracked, just so we'll get enough heat to finish at least. A dozen loaves, the boy's chest puffs with pride. Even here, even in a day sodden by rain and debts, a small triumph blooms. Marcus moves to the waiting baskets, lifting the damp cloth from one to examine a broad, squat round of dough. His fingers press lightly into its side. It gives, but sluggishly, he sighs. Lazy lumps today, he murmurs, though without malice. Then, turning to you, he adds in a tone half jest, half resignation, if only senators rose as slow as this, we might have less cause to fear their taxes. You smile, feeling the weight of his joke. It's the weary humor of those who can't afford real anger, who laugh because the alternative would be despair. As he works, the door opens again, admitting a breath of wet air and a matron swaddled in a heavy shawl. She carries a wicker basket. Her eyes are sharp beneath the hood. Marcus, my cook, says yesterday's bread turned to mush by supper. I need better today. He offers a shallow bow domina. Clodia, I'm doing all that's possible. The ovens struggle with this cursed damp. I've paid extra for charcoal, pressed the boys half to death to keep the flames alive. Clodia's mouth twitches. Not quite sympathetic, but not cruel either. Your bread feeds 20 mouths in my house. If it sours, it's not my cook. Who will bear the shame at table? I understand, Marcus says, dipping his head again. If you would wait, even half an hour, I can give you a loaf that's near perfect. She studies him, then the apprentices, who fidget under her scrutiny. Finally she nods, placing her basket on the counter. Half an hour, but see you keep your promise. I'd rather the rain ruin my cloak than your bread ruin my dinner. When she steps away to inspect the tiny display of sweet rolls, a luxury, Poorly, rising under the damp cloths, Marcus exhales a sigh so deep it seems to pull years from his chest. He leans close to you. She has brothers on the city council. Lose her favor, and the next thing I know, my shop's paying double fees for stall space. It's these little admissions that strike you, not the loud threats of debt collectors, like Domitius earlier, but the softer, almost invisible levers of power. A lady's whispered complaint, a council vote changed by a frown at the wrong dinner. The bread may look humble on its straw-lined trays, but it is threaded through Roman life with invisible cords that bind everyone from slaves to senators. At the oven, the apprentices begin to work in earnest. The older boy, Lucius, still flushed with the victory of rekindled flames, slides a wooden peel under one tentative loaf and slides it gently into the now glowing mouth. Steam hisses as the damp dough meets the hot stones. The smell that rises is richer than before, carrying the tang of yeast just beginning to brown. Marcus closes his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing it. Then he rolls his shoulders back, straightening with a quiet pride. There, by Saturn, I'll have loaves fit for a merchant's table yet. Clodia returns to the counter, peering at the oven. How long? Not long, Domina. A proper crust needs the heat to catch, then it will hold the crumb light. I'd rather risk a glare from you than see my bread collapse in your steward's hands. Her mouth twists, but it's close to a reluctant smile. Your tongue's smoother than your dough on these wet days, Marcus. I'll wait. The minutes crawl by. The apprentices take turns turning the loaves carefully, using long iron hooks. Each motion is delicate, almost tender. You watch, Lucius. Lean in close to listen for the hollow sound that tells a baker's ear the bread is firming properly inside. When he nods, Marcus lets out a small breath that's nearly a laugh. The first finished loaf emerges golden, though its sides are faintly pallid where the fire was weaker. Marcus taps it, listening for that crucial note, a dull echo that means there's enough air within. Then he wraps it in linen and places it reverently in Clodia's basket. She accepts it, weighing it with a practiced hand, then drops a pair of extra copper coins onto the counter. For the trouble, see, it's no worse tomorrow. When she departs, Marcus simply leans both hands on the counter, shoulders shaking in a small, private release of tension. You notice the apprentices glance at each other, then back at their master with shy relief. They've won this battle for today. Outside, the rain has lightened to a drifting mist, the kind that dampens eyelashes and curls at the edges of tunics, but no longer beats like tiny drumsticks on the street. A cart rolls by with an indifferent donkey, barrels lashed in place. Somewhere down the block, someone laughs, the sound bright and unexpected. Marcus looks out at the street, then back at you. His eyes are tired but shining. In the end, bread is simple. Flour, water, salt, a little yeast, a little fire. But each morning I rise, wondering if today the gods will grant me all five in the right measure. He turns to oversee another box being coaxed into the oven, voice dropping so low you almost miss it. And if they do not, will tomorrow still belong to me? And you wonder, how often did the fate of entire households, the flow of coin through Roman streets, hinge on something so fragile as dough that refused to rise, on fires that struggled against rain, on boys whose breath alone decided if bread would feed 20 mouths or none at all. Night falls slowly over the city. Rome's streets, slick from hours of rain, now glisten under wavering lamps and occasional torchlight. Pools of water catch and hold the soft yellow glow, making it seem as if tiny molten suns have fallen and been trapped among the cobblestones. The air is cool, clinging damp to every surface inside Marcus's bakery. The warmth is fragile, maintained only by the last breaths of the oven's fire. You stand quietly by the counter, watching as the day's final loaves are coaxed from the mouth of the oven. They emerge modestly golden, their undersides still pale, but with just enough hollow ring beneath Marcus's tapping knuckles to pass his cautious judgment. Lucius, the older apprentice, carries them one by one to a rack, near the door where they steam in the night air. Each loaf seems almost a victory against the weather, against the smothering damp that threatened to ruin the yeast, against creditors' threats that hovered close all afternoon. The younger apprentice, a wiry boy named Silvanus, scarcely 12, wipes sweat and flour from his brow, then rubs it nervously on his tunic when he notices Marcus watching. Marcus simply gives a small, tired grin. Go on then. Eat before your legs give out from under you. Silvanus darts to the counter where a broken loaf sits. The crust cracked awkwardly. It hadn't finished properly, and so couldn't be sold. With a small, bright gratitude, he tears a chunk free and stuffs it into his mouth, cheeks bulging. Lucius joins him, more reserved, but no less hungry, breaking off a piece and chewing slowly, savoring it. You watch them and realize these boys may have gone without much else today. Their wages are meager, their days long, but this humble bread, flawed though it is, binds them to the shop and to each other. Marcus steps behind the counter and begins to tally the day's earnings. The little pile of coins is thin, heavy on small denominations. He pushes them into neat stacks with flour-caked fingers, lips moving in a whisper as he calculates. After a moment, he sighs, gathers the copper into a cloth pouch, and ties it to his belt. Not enough to pay Domitius fully, but enough, perhaps, to keep him patient. Then, almost as if ashamed to have spoken the thought aloud, he looks up and catches your gaze. You see, friend, it's not only bread I bake each day. I bake a measure of trust with every loaf. Trust from my creditors, from my customers, from my own apprentices who hope this shop will still stand tomorrow. Sylvanus has sunk to the floor by the oven, back against its warm side, eyes fluttering. Lucius sits nearby, knees drawn up under his chin, chewing the last crust of the ruined loaf with patient resignation. Marcus watches them both, and for a moment his weary face softens into something almost paternal. They'll learn, he says quietly, not just how to knead and score, but how to read a man's moods, how to spot rain clouds 2 streets away, how to stretch coin without snapping it. He pauses, a small shrug raising one shoulder. If they're lucky, they'll stay bakers all their days and never know the sharper edges of Roman life. Outside, the street has quieted. The market stalls across the way are dark now, awnings rolled tight, stray dogs nosing for scraps in the gutters. Somewhere in the distance, laughter rises from a tavern, high and careless, echoing off the stones. It sounds almost foreign here, in the hush of the bakery, where life has slowed to the pace of small breaths and cooling ovens. Marcus moves to the doorway, leaning against the frame. You join him there, both of you, staring out into the misty dark, as if hoping to glimpse something better approaching. Years ago, he says, voice low, I might have dreamed of a larger shop. 2 ovens, more apprentices, a place near the forum where senators, slaves queued each morning for my bread. But dreams sit poorly on a baker's shoulders. The dough needs you here, now, not wandering off after visions. He gives a small, wry smile. And besides, even emperors depend on men like me. They just don't always remember it. If tomorrow I fail, 100 tables go wanting. A senator's feast grows tense when the bread sours. A merchant's deal might falter over a poor crust. It seems trivial, yet it isn't. It's the small things that hold Rome upright. Behind you, Sylvanus lets out a soft snore. Lucius gathers a threadbare blanket from under the counter and drapes it over the younger boy's shoulders. Marcus watches, pride flickering in his eyes, though he says nothing. Instead, he steps outside, draws in a long breath of the damp night air, and lets it go in a sigh that seems to loosen something deep within him. You follow his gaze down the street. A lamp sways gently on its hook, sending a pool of gold across the wet stones. For a moment, it's easy to believe Rome is built not on conquest or marble or gold, but on such humble sights: boys asleep by an oven, a baker counting coppers, the slow, patient rising of dough, even under the weight of endless rain. And you wonder how many histories are hidden in places like this: shops that close with a simple latch, ovens that dim to embers, men who whisper hopes into their dough. Each morning, how often did the fate of a city hang on bread that, by nothing more than luck or weather, rose just well enough to keep fear at bay for one more day? You find yourself in a narrow lane off the busy Argiletum, a winding street in Rome, famous for its booksellers, cheap eateries, and small trades. But this lane, half hidden under drooping balconies and stained awnings, is home to a quieter commerce, lantern makers and sellers of humble clay lamps. Today, the rain has returned, creeping through every crack in the city's defenses. It runs down the walls in slender silver threads, patters into shallow ruts worn by countless footsteps, pools around doorways where dogs sleep curled against the damp. The air smells of wet terracotta, faint oil, and the pungent temps of old leather from harnesses hanging in nearby stalls. You stand under a sagging canopy stretched across two shop fronts. Above your head, drops gather on the cloth edge until it sags just slightly more, a delicate trembling that warns it will spill its burden soon. From here, you watch the lantern makers work. Inside the shop nearest you, a man named Severus stands over a wooden table littered with shallow clay bowls. They're unglazed, the simplest form of lamp, just enough to hold oil and a thin wick. He sorts them with the tired precision of a man long resigned to small tasks. Each lamp is tested by gently tapping the rim with a knuckle, listening for a clear note that means it has fired properly. A dull thud means flaws, cracks that might leak precious oil, or worse, shatter under heat. Beside Severus, his eldest daughter Flavia trims lengths of wick from a coil of fibrous flax, her small knife deft despite the faint tremor in her chilled fingers. The strands stick slightly, damp from the heavy air. She sighs, brushes her hand against her apron, and sets the cut wicks carefully into a shallow basket. "It's no use today," she mutters, not realizing you're close enough to hear. "They'll smoke and spit. Customers will curse us by tomorrow." Severus does not look up. His eyes remain on a lamp. He turns slowly in his hands. They always curse, rain or sun. Better they curse our wicks than starve us with empty purses. A tiny, weary truth, offered without bitterness, only the flat acceptance of men and women who've learned how fragile Rome's bustling streets truly are beneath their marble pride. A customer appears then, a woman wrapped tightly in a dark blue palla, her feet bare save for sodden sandals. She pauses at the threshold as though reluctant to step into the dim shop, wary perhaps of mingling damp shadows. Then she ducks in, shaking rain from her sleeves. "Severus," she says, voice low but edged with worry. "The lamps you sold my husband last week half guttered out before midnight. The feast went poorly for it." Severus sets down the lamp he's inspecting. His expression is careful, neutral, as he wipes his hands on a cloth. The oil matters more than the wick. Domina Valeria, thin oil, smokes. Heavy oil chokes the flame. And rain such as we've had, even the best wick draws poorly. She frowns, shifting her weight. "Still, you've always promised yours were the better. Will this new lot burn true?" Flavia steps forward before her father can answer. She holds up the basket. "We've taken care. Cut each from the dry heart of the coil, where damp cannot creep. They'll catch well if your servant trims the ends clean before lighting." Valeria eyes her a moment, then nods slowly. "Very well. Send 3 dozen by evening. I've another gathering tomorrow, and I will not have guests stumbling over their cups in the dark." When she leaves, Severus releases a long breath. Flavia sets the basket down more heavily than she intends, rattling the tiny lengths of flax. "Do you think she'll pay on time this time?" She whispers. Severus only shrugs. "Or she'll pay late, or pay less, or send word she found fault and keep half without paying at all. Such is business under Rome's gracious roofs." Then, noticing you, he offers a wry half-smile. "Stranger, you might think an empire built on legions and law would be more secure than a lantern's wick. But I've lived long enough to see soldiers stumble for want of light, ledgers go unpaid because lamps failed to burn through the night. Even the mighty trip when they cannot see the mud at their feet. You wander deeper into the shop. The shelves here are crowded with more elaborate lanterns, some bronze, greened with age or fingerprints, some iron, intricately pierced so they might throw patterns of light across atrium walls. A few are fine enough that a senator's household might hang them during a dinner, delicate chains twined with tiny silver leaves. But these are rarities. The real lifeblood of this shop lies in rows upon rows of simple clay lamps, each no bigger than your palm. Cheap, disposable by the standards of Rome's wealthy, yet indispensable. Each one a small promise of comfort, a fragile glow against long shadows, a bit of assurance that a family might find the chamber pot in the dark, that thieves or rats might be kept at bay for a few hours longer. Near the back, another daughter, little Julia, scarcely 8, crouches on a stool, using a thin reed to clean soot from older lamp molds. She hums softly to herself, a small, trembling song, almost lost under the steady patter of rain on the roof tiles. Severus glances at her, and for a heartbeat his eyes soften, deep lines easing from around them. Then he returns to his tally. You take in the whole scene, the cool, damp air, heavy with the faint sting of oil, the smell of clay that never fully loses its earthy temps, no matter how carefully it's fired, the hushed dance of survival among lanterns and ledgers. It's all so unremarkable, yet so profoundly necessary, and you wonder how many thousands in Rome tonight will rest easier because these hands have worked through the drizzle and sighs. How many hearts depend on a small flame flickering in a corner, never guessing how easily a damp day could plunge them into deeper dark. The afternoon drifts on, a slow unspooling of hours, marked by the rhythm of rain tapping on clay roof tiles. Inside Severus's shop, the gloom deepens despite the tiny lamps lit on the high shelves, a small, defiant glow against the gray. You stand near the door, shoulder brushing, a post where rain has seeped through to darken the wood. The smell here is a quiet tangle, damp earth from the street, bitter traces of singed oil, and the faint sweetness of clay still curing in hidden stacks. Flavia works steadily at her table, trimming and coiling wicks into small bundles tied with string. Each is set carefully into a basket, the work almost meditative. Every so often, she flexes her fingers, stiff from the cold. Her breath clouds faintly in the air. The brazier near the wall has burned low, its coals too few to chase away the damp. Entirely at the rear of the shop, Severus and a young journeyman named Denter crouch over a fresh mold. The mold has cracked slightly along one seam, the faintest flaw, yet enough to let oil seep out in future lamps. Severus runs a calloused thumb over the split, shaking his head. We'll lose a day's work if this one gives under the fire. Dent shifts uneasily. Could we fill it with slip? Let it dry longer before the kill? Maybe, Severus sighs. Or maybe it breaks anyway, and we waste good fuel firing a fault. His shoulders slump a little, but try. I've not the coin to replace the mold outright. Patch it. Whisper to Mercury, if you must. The door swings open again, ushering in a brief, sharper chill. Against the drizzle, still clinging to his wool, his tunic bears faint stains of wine, and his sandals squelch on the threshold. You watch Severus stiffen, quickly smoothing his expression into wary politeness. Livius, he says with a nod. You're early. Better early than pay extra later. Livius grunts. His eyes roam the shop. Have you my order? 40 lamps for the baths on the Subura. They'll need them tomorrow. The overseer claims 3 hallways stand near dark. Severus lifts a hand. beckoning Flavia. She brings the basket of plain lamps, each carefully tested, edges smoothed to avoid snags on wicks. Livius peers inside, lifting one, turning it over as though expecting to find fault lurking beneath. "These feel damp," he mutters. "It's the air today, but the clay's well fired. It will draw the oil fine. Only keep them near a brazier before lighting. A moment's warmth, and they'll glow, true." Livius snorts. "If they don't, my master will dock my pay, and I'll dock yours twice as hard." He rummages in his purse, drawing out a fist of coins. After counting out less than the full sum, he pushes it toward Severus. "Rest when the baths have no complaint." Severus hesitates, then nods tightly. "As you say." He takes the coins, each one sliding into his palm like a tiny weight added to some hidden scale of debt and worry. When Livius leaves, Flavia lets out a small sound, half sigh, half laugh. He always pays light. Severus gives her a tired look, but he pays. "That's more than many, and the lamps will burn well enough. You tied each wick, true. I trust your hands more than his promises." At this, her face lifts, pride flickering there, fragile as the flame in one of their tiny lamps. Nearby, little Julia has abandoned her suit cleaning for now, perched instead on an upturned crate that dances uncertainly through the dim shop. Severus glances her way, and something eases in his face. He crosses to her, rests a broad hand atop her head. "You'll know more about lamps than half the men in Rome by the time you're grown," he says. Julia giggles, tilting her head so his hand slides off. Hugging her knees, watching her father with solemn, curious eyes, you find your gaze drifting over the shelves again. Some lamps are crude, little more than clay scoops. Others show faint patterns pressed into damp walls before firing, simple lines that look almost like leaves. A few bare thumbprints, so clear you imagine you might match them to the hands still working here. This is the hidden artistry of Rome, not just marble arches or towering statues of emperors, but these small vessels made by families who eat their bread and pay their debts from the thin line between light and dark. Each lamp is a promise, a few hours of comfort against the night, a guard against thieves, rats, stray spirits. Flavia comes to stand beside you, rubbing her hands on her apron. "We complain, yes," she says, as though picking up a thread you hadn't spoken aloud, "about the rain, the cracked molds, customers who cheat us, but still, when night comes, who would dare do without us? The great houses, the narrow alleys, even the temples, they all beg our flames." Her voice holds no arrogance, only a quiet wonder, as if she still marvels at her family's place in the vast, wheezing machinery of the city. Then she offers you a small, tired smile and returns to her work. Severus watches her go, then meets your eyes. "Sometimes I envy the dark," he confesses softly. "It owes nothing to anyone. It comes whether a lamp burns or not." But after a heartbeat, he shakes his head, almost amused by his own melancholy. "Still, the dark feeds no mouths, and so we work, even when the wicks spit and the oil sulks in its pot." He moves to his bench again, hands already busy sorting the next basket of lamps for trimming and polishing. You sense the weight of every choice, every coin. Not dramatic, simply necessary, the quiet compulsion of survival. And you wonder, how many fragile empires have been held aloft by trades so humble no historian would bother to record them? How many unseen hands, tying flax wicks, patching cracked molds, bargaining for fare? Coin truly kept the heart of Rome from stumbling into darkness. Night has settled over Rome with a patient inevitability, swallowing streets and alleys alike in deep, shifting shadows. The rain has finally thinned to a lazy drizzle, more mist than storm, though it still beads on every tile and trickles along gutters with a soft, persistent murmur. Inside Severus's shop, the small lamps lining the shelves have been lit, each one casting a delicate circle of gold that spills onto clay jars and wooden benches. Push the darkness back, not far, only to the corners and under tables, but enough for now. You stand near the doorway, leaning against the frame. From here, you can see Severus at his workbench, gently scoring the rims of fresh lamps so they'll better grip the wicks. Each small groove catches the light in tiny ridges, glinting like a modest promise. Flavia sits across from him, elbows on the table, her hands busy winding lengths of flax. Her movements have slowed. Fatigue etches delicate lines into the corners of her eyes. But there's also something steady in her manner, the practiced grace of someone who knows exactly how much pressure is needed, exactly how many turns will yield the perfect coil. Little Julia is curled on a folded blanket near the brazier. Her small face, half lit by the nearest lamp, rests on her arms. Now and then she stirs, murmuring soft words only she can hear, dreams brushing lightly against waking. When Severus glances her way, the look on his face is a quiet blend of relief and guilt. Relief that she rests peacefully. Guilt, perhaps, that tomorrow he will still depend on tiny hands to clean soot from molds and sort wicks for customers who might never give a second thought to who prepared their light. A knock sounds at the door, cautious, polite. Flavia rises, smoothing her apron, and pulls the latch. A neighbor stands there, a woman carrying a lidded basket that steams faintly in the cool air. "Bread from my hearth," she says, offering it with a small smile. "Your children have helped me often enough when my boys ran to the circus instead of chopping wood." Flavia's eyes brighten. "It's too much. It's nothing," the woman interrupts gently. "We all lean on one another when rain ruins the market days. Tell your father I'll bring more oil next week, cheaper, from my cousin's press." When she's gone, Flavia sets the basket on the counter, lifting the lid to reveal a pair of loaves still warm, crusts split just enough to show the tender crumb inside. Severus looks up from his work, his eyes softening. He murmurs, "Sometimes it is neighbors who keep Rome from tumbling down." They share the bread quietly. Flavia breaks off pieces for Julia, who wakes long enough to chew sleepily before sinking back into her doze. Even Denter, the journeyman, accepts a portion, chewing with slow gratitude. It's a modest feast by any measure. No olives or cheese to accompany it. No wine to warm bellies beyond the small brazier's glow. But there's a peace in the simple act of sharing that feels almost ceremonial. As they eat, Severus leans back, lamplight catching in the small lines of clay, dust clinging to his tunic. "You know," he says, voice low so as not to wake Julia fully, "there are days I wish I'd been a farmer beyond the city walls. When rain came, it would mean water for crops, not wicks that fail and clay that cracks." Flavia tilts her head, considering. But who would light the lamps then? Who would keep the streets from swallowing their own footsteps after sundown? He chuckles, softly, nodding. "Perhaps that's true. Perhaps Rome stays standing because we chase the dark away, even just enough to let men stumble home from the taverns." They fall into a companionable silence, punctuated only by the soft crackle of the brazier and Julia's slow breathing. The little shop seems almost a world apart from the rest of Rome, from the echoing courts where magistrates argue, from the crowded forums where deals are struck, from the barracks where soldiers sharpen blades for wars far beyond these rain-washed rooftops. Here, the great engine of empire hums in small, tender motions. A father testing the weight of a lamp, A daughter trimming wicks so fine they'll burn smooth. A sleepy child dreaming by the glow her own hands helped prepare. Eventually, Severus rises, stretching the tiredness from his shoulders. He crosses to the shelves and begins snuffing the lamps, one by one. Each tiny light vanishes with a faint sigh. Darkness rushing in to claim the space it had briefly ceded. By the time he reaches the final lamp, the shop stands mostly in shadow, lit only by the dying brazier. He pauses, palm cupped around the last fragile flame. Its little dance of gold seems to study him in return. Then he lowers his hand, gently pinching the wick, and darkness folds them all in, and you wonder how many centuries rested on such simple gestures, a lamp lit, a lamp doused. How many emperors dreamed safely because a tradesman's humble work kept the dark at bay for just one more night. And isn't it possible that Rome's true conquerors were these quiet keepers of the fragile flame, never praised in marble, but forever written in the soft glow that pushed shadows back from every threshold? You find yourself standing on the threshold of a long, narrow warehouse along the banks of the Tiber. The rain has finally slackened to a fitful mist, but the sky remains heavy, smudged gray with lingering thunderheads that still grumble faintly in the distance. The air tastes of wet stone, river silt, and the faint tank of fermenting grapeskins. Inside, the warehouse is dim, lit by a handful of oil lamps set in wall niches. Shadows pool in the corners, stretching long around the rows of stacked amphorae. Each clay vessel is sealed with pitch and stamped with tiny markings that tell careful stories. Vineyard of origin, type of wine. Perhaps even a short prayer scratched by a hopeful worker who once hefted it onto a cart. The merchants here pace between the stacks, voices pitched low. You watch them move, hands folded behind their backs, brows knit, eyes flicking constantly toward the narrow slit windows. Beyond lies the Tiber, swollen and brown, lapping too close to the foundations for anyone's comfort. At a wooden table near the entrance stands Antonius, a modest wine trader whose fortunes hinge on days exactly like this. He's reviewing a wax tablet crowded with neat scratches. His clerk, a slim man with ink-stained fingers, points at a line and murmurs something. Antonius frowns, presses his lips tight, and then scratches his chin where gray stubble shadows the skin. It's the shipment from Kales I worry for, Antonius mutters, loud enough now for you to catch. If the road turns to mud, the wagons will founder, or worse, be waylaid by desperate farmhands. Wine's a poor cargo for bandits' bellies, but clay jars fetch coin enough to tempt. His clerk gives a tiny shrug, as if to say there's little to be done about thieves or weather. And the barrels from Capua, shall I offer them cheaper in the Subura, to move them quickly before they sour? Antonius looks pained, rubbing a hand across the ledger. If thunder rolls again tonight, the damp might creep through every stave. Better a lean profit than spoiled vats. A loud crack from outside, just a cart's wheel slamming over a loose stone, sends the clerk flinching, eyes darting to the doorway. Antonius chuckles dryly, though there's no real amusement in it. Easy, Livius, Jupiter's hammers have not fallen yet, but keep the torches ready. If storm winds rise, we'll need to seal these doors tight. I've lost enough stock to water rot for 3 lifetimes. You wander deeper into the warehouse. The smell of the wine is everywhere, rich, slightly sharp, mingled with cool clay and faint mildew clinging to the damp corners. It's a scent that is almost Rome itself, a promise of revelry in crowded taverns, of whispered secrets exchanged, over-brimming cups of small pleasures that make even heavy burdens easier to carry. A pair of laborers move slowly down one aisle, tapping each amphora with a tiny bronze hammer. They pause now and then to listen. A clear ring means safety, intact clay, tight seals. A dull thunk draws a frown. One man marks the suspect vessel with a streak of red chalk. Set it aside, he murmurs to his partner. Best not send it to the senator's feast if there's water in the base. Near the back, under a hanging lamp that throws tremulous gold across his lined face, an older merchant named Decimus hovers over a small tray of wax tablets. He is more richly dressed than Antonius, a gold clasp holding his cloak at the shoulder. Yet his fingers tremble slightly as he runs them across the tablet's notations. The parties on the Esquiline will demand Falernian by the amphora tomorrow night, he murmurs, almost to himself. If they find only sour Ligurian, gods, they'll have my name smeared across every table from here to the circus. His steward stands by patiently, hands clasped, eyes on the floor. When Decimus finally looks up, it's with a sort of desperate humor. Imagine it, Silas, Rome's grandest houses, clutching their stomachs, cursing Decimus, the unworthy merchant who sold them mold and thunder in a jar. Silas only inclines his head. Better mold than murder, dominus, the poor drink. Whatever swills without complaint. It's only the rich who pay extra to curse their host. Decimus lets out a dry laugh, though it cracks halfway through. True enough, but still. See that we double the torches near the river doors. If water rises, I'd rather haul these jars by hand to the upper storeroom than have the Tiber drink them all. You stand quietly, taking it all in. The merchants fret over notes scratched in wax. The laborers rap gently on clay, ears tuned for the smallest betrayal. Outside these walls, Rome's mighty engines grind on senators' plot. Soldiers train, architects dream of arches yet unbuilt. Yet how many of their plans lean, silent and unsuspecting, on these simple vessels, not cracking under damp or theft or an ill-timed storm. And you wonder how much of Rome's daily peace was poured from these humble jars. How often did the moods of powerful men, even their willingness to wage or halt a war, soften under the mellow fog of good wine, never suspecting that a distant thunderhead or a slippery road might have robbed them of that fragile grace. The afternoon drags on with a hush that feels tense rather than peaceful. Inside the warehouse, the air is damp and still, heavy with the mingled aromas of wet clay, faint mildew, and the resinous pitch that seals each jar. Every footstep echoes oddly off the rows of amphorae, as if the stored wine itself is listening. Antonius stands again near his table, leaning heavily on one palm, pressed flat to the wax tablets. His other hand rubs at his temple as though trying to knead away a gathering headache. Beside him, his clerk Livius quietly lists overdue accounts in a voice low and cautious. Each name, each half-paid sum, seems to draw Antonius's brow lower. Enough. Antonius finally says, with a weary flick of his wrist, "We'll chase them after Saturn's feast, when pockets loosen. For now it does no good to gnaw at old bones." He crosses to a crate half-filled with straw packing. Inside nestles a smaller jar, its clay unusually smooth, stamped with an elaborate mark near the neck, Falernian, from a prized hillside far south. It's a delicacy reserved for senators' banquets or temple dedications. If a storm were to turn the river's edge into a sucking mire tonight, these delicate treasures would be among the first casualties. Antonius rests a hand on the lip of the jar. "Carry this up to the loft," he tells Livius. "Stack it high, even if it means squeezing out the cheap stuff. Let thunder try its worst on our lesser wares." At the far end of the warehouse, Decimus is having a similar conversation. You hear his voice, unusually strained, as he speaks to his steward. Move the Capuan stock to the second floor. The floor joists groan underweight enough, but better that than watching our best offerings bob down the Tiber. Shall the first hire porters from the street? His steward asks. They loiter by the shipyards. Still Decimus hesitates. Hired men, mean coins, spent, or worse, loose tongues. Who knew what rumors might spill from careless mouths about his finances or the fragility of his stores? At last he mutters, if you must, watch them. Pay them to carry, not to pry. You watch the small drama unfold. 4 broad-backed porters, still slick from rain, smelling faintly of old fish from working ships earlier tramp in through the wide doors. They grin at each other, laughing quietly at some joke about fat merchants with too much to fear. But once inside, the rows of amphorae seem to cow them. They move more carefully, bending low to shoulder heavy jars against stained teenis. Each step they take sends tiny tremors through the stone floor. You see Decimus wince every time an amphora rattles faintly against its neighbor. In these moments, the whole empire's veneer of power seems delicate indeed, not carried on the backs of legions, but balanced precariously on a few cautious shoulders, and clay that might crack at the smallest slip. Outside the warehouse, the sky grumbles again, a low, rolling protest that sends crows flapping from a line of fig trees by the river road. The porters glance up nervously, their joking forgotten. The smell of storm is thick, a scent like fresh iron mixed with crushed leaves. Antonia steps into the doorway, peering toward the muddy lanes. A cart struggles there, one wheel sinking deep into a rut. The driver shouts at the mule, who brays in complaint, ears twitching at the far-off thunder. A passing woman clutches her basket tighter and skirts wide, as though afraid the entire vehicle might collapse in a splash of spilled wine and ruined hopes. Here, the great engine of empire hums in small, tender motions. A father testing the weight of a lamp. A daughter trimming wicks so fine they'll burn smooth. A sleepy child dreaming by the glow her own hands helped prepare. Eventually, Severus rises, stretching the tiredness from his shoulders. He crosses to the shelves and begins snuffing the lamps one by one. Each tiny light vanishes with a faint sigh. Darkness rushing in to claim the space it had briefly ceded. By the time he reaches the final lamp, the shop stands mostly in shadow, lit only by the dying brazier. He pauses, palm cupped around the last fragile flame. Its little dance of gold seems to study him in return. Then he lowers his hand, gently pinching the wick, and darkness folds them all in, and you wonder how many centuries rested on such simple gestures, a lamp lit, a lamp doused. How many emperors dreamed safely because a tradesman's humble work kept the dark at bay for just one more night. And isn't it possible that Rome's true conquerors were these quiet keepers of the fragile flame, never praised in marble, but forever written in the soft glow that pushed shadows back from every threshold? You find yourself standing on the threshold of a long, narrow warehouse along the banks of the Tiber. The rain has finally slackened to a fitful mist, but the sky remains heavy, smudged gray with lingering thunderheads that still grumble faintly in the distance. The air tastes of wet stone, river silt, and the faint tank of fermenting grapeskins. Inside, the warehouse is dim, lit by a handful of oil lamps set in wall niches. Shadows pool in the corners, stretching long around the rows of stacked amphorae. Each clay vessel is sealed with pitch and stamped with tiny markings that tell careful stories. Vineyard of origin, type of wine. Perhaps even a short prayer scratched by a hopeful worker who once hefted it onto a cart. The merchants here pace between the stacks, voices pitched low. You watch them move, hands folded behind their backs, brows knit, eyes flicking constantly toward the narrow slit windows. Beyond lies the Tiber, swollen and brown, lapping too close to the foundations for anyone's comfort. At a wooden table near the entrance stands Antonius, a modest wine trader whose fortunes hinge on days exactly like this. He's reviewing a wax tablet crowded with neat scratches. His clerk, a slim man with ink-stained fingers, points at a line and murmurs something. Antonius frowns, presses his lips tight, and then scratches his chin where gray stubble shadows the skin. It's the shipment from Kale's I worry for, Antonius mutters, loud enough now for you to catch. If the road turns to mud, the wagons will founder, or worse, be waylaid by desperate farmhands. Wine's a poor cargo for bandits' bellies, but clay jars fetch coin enough to tempt. His clerk gives a tiny shrug, as if to say there's little to be done about thieves or weather. And the barrels from Capua, shall I offer them cheaper in the Subura, to move them quickly before they sour? Antonius looks pained, rubbing a hand across the ledger. If thunder rolls again tonight, the damp might creep through every stave. Better a lean profit than spoiled vats. A loud crack from outside, just a cart's wheel slamming over a loose stone, sends the clerk flinching, eyes darting to the doorway. Antonius chuckles dryly, though there's no real amusement in it. Easy, Livius, Jupiter's hammers have not fallen yet, but keep the torches ready. If storm winds rise, we'll need to seal these doors tight. I've lost enough stock to water rot for 3 lifetimes. You wander deeper into the warehouse. The smell of the wine is everywhere, rich, slightly sharp, mingled with cool clay and faint mildew clinging to the damp corners. It's a scent that is almost Rome itself, a promise of revelry in crowded taverns, of whispered secrets exchanged, over-brimming cups of small pleasures that make even heavy burdens easier to carry. A pair of laborers move slowly down one aisle, tapping each amphora with a tiny bronze hammer. They pause now and then to listen. A clear ring means safety, intact clay, tight seals. A dull thunk draws a frown. One man marks the suspect vessel with a streak of red chalk. Set it aside, he murmurs to his partner. Best not send it to the senator's feast if there's water in the base. Near the back, under a hanging lamp that throws tremulous gold across his lined face, an older merchant named Decimus hovers over a small tray of wax tablets. He is more richly dressed than Antonius, a gold clasp holding his cloak at the shoulder. Yet his fingers tremble slightly as he runs them across the tablet's notations. The parties on the Esquiline will demand Falernian by the amphora tomorrow night, he murmurs, almost to himself. If they find only sour Ligurian, gods, they'll have my name smeared across every table from here to the circus. His steward stands by patiently, hands clasped, eyes on the floor. When Decimus finally looks up, it's with a sort of desperate humor. Imagine it, Silas, Rome's grandest houses, clutching their stomachs, cursing Decimus, the unworthy merchant who sold them mold and thunder in a jar. Silas only inclines his head, better mold than murder, dominance, the poor drink. Whatever swills without complaint. It's only the rich who pay extra to curse their host. Decimus lets out a dry laugh, though it cracks halfway through. True enough, but still. See that we double the torches near the river doors. If water rises, I'd rather haul these jars by hand to the upper storeroom than have the Tiber drink them all. You stand quietly, taking it all in. The merchants fret over notes scratched in wax. The laborers rap gently on clay, ears tuned for the smallest betrayal. Outside these walls, Rome's mighty engines grind on senators' plot. Soldiers train, architects dream of arches yet unbuilt. Yet how many of their plans lean, silent and unsuspecting, on these simple vessels, not cracking under damp or theft or an ill-timed storm. And you wonder how much of Rome's daily peace was poured from these humble jars. How often did the moods of powerful men, even their willingness to wage or halt a war, soften under the mellow fog of good wine, never suspecting that a distant thunderhead or a slippery road might have robbed them of that fragile grace. The afternoon drags on with a hush that feels tense rather than peaceful. Inside the warehouse, the air is damp and still, heavy with the mingled aromas of wet clay, faint mildew, and the resinous pitch that seals each jar. Every footstep echoes oddly off the rows of amphorae, as if the stored wine itself is listening. Antonius stands again near his table, leaning heavily on one palm, pressed flat to the wax tablets. His other hand rubs at his temple as though trying to knead away a gathering headache. Beside him, his clerk Livius quietly lists overdue accounts in a voice low and cautious. Each name, each half-paid sum, seems to draw Antonius's brow lower. Enough. Antonius finally says, with a weary flick of his wrist, "We'll chase them after Saturn's feast, when pockets loosen. For now it does no good to gnaw at old bones." He crosses to a crate half filled with straw packing. Inside nestles a smaller jar, its clay unusually smooth, stamped with an elaborate mark near the neck, Falernian, from a prized hillside far south. It's a delicacy reserved for senators' banquets or temple dedications. If a storm were to turn the river's edge into a sucking mire tonight, these delicate treasures would be among the first casualties. Antonius rests a hand on the lip of the jar. "Carry this up to the loft," he tells Livius. "Stack it high, even if it means squeezing out the cheap stuff. Let thunder try its worst on our lesser wares." At the far end of the warehouse, Decimus is having a similar conversation. You hear his voice, unusually strained, as he speaks to his steward. "Move the Capuan stock to the second floor. The floor joists grown underweight enough, but better that than watching our best offerings bob down the Tiber." "Shall the first hire porters from the street?" his steward asks. "They loiter by the shipyards." Still Decimus hesitates. Hired men, mean coins, spent, or worse, loose tongues. Who knew what rumors might spill from careless mouths about his finances or the fragility of his stores? At last he mutters, "If you must, watch them. Pay them to carry, not to pry." You watch the small drama unfold. 4 broad-backed porters, still slick from rain, smelling faintly of old fish from working ships earlier, tramp in through the wide doors. They grin at each other, laughing quietly at some joke about fat merchants with too much to fear. But once inside, the rows of amphorae seem to cow them. They move more carefully, bending low to shoulder heavy jars against stained tinnis. Each step they take sends tiny tremors through the stone floor. You see Decimus wince every time an amphora rattles faintly against its neighbor. In these moments, the whole empire's veneer of power seems delicate indeed, not carried on the backs of legions, but balanced precariously on a few cautious shoulders, and clay that might crack at the smallest slip. Outside the warehouse, the sky grumbles again, a low, rolling protest that sends crows flapping from a line of fig trees by the river road. The porters glance up nervously, their joking forgotten. The smell of storm is thick, a scent like fresh iron mixed with crushed leaves. Antonia steps into the doorway, peering toward the muddy lanes. A cart struggles there, one wheel sinking deep into a rut. The driver shouts at the mule, who brays in complaint, ears twitching at the far-off thunder. A passing woman clutches her basket tighter and skirts wide, as though afraid the entire vehicle might collapse in a splash of spilled wine and ruined hopes. Back inside, laborers continue their careful work. The pair who earlier tapped each jar with tiny hammers now lift them one by one to check the undersides. Watch for water creeping up the straw, one murmurs. Last storm, it ruined half. The row before we caught the scent, the other nods, running a thumb along the base of a vessel. Damp here, too cool by the wall. They shifted to a higher shelf, whispering tiny prayers to Mercury under their breath, the patron, not just of travelers and thieves, but also of tradesmen, forever caught between risk and ruin. Later, you watch Decimus gather the last handful of coins from a small lockbox near his table. His steward watches with flat eyes as he counts them twice, then 3 times. A lean purse, Decimus mutters, but let it be lean rather than empty. Pay the porters well enough, they remember me fondly, not as a man who cheated their sweat. He hesitates, then adds, almost to himself, and perhaps Mercury will look kindly on honest wages if thunder grows jealous tonight. All around, these small, anxious rituals repeat. Hands brush damp clay as if checking for fevers. Ledgers are closed with gentle pats, as though reassuring themselves the debts recorded inside will not vanish like mist. Tiny lamps are trimmed and lit, their flames dancing uncertainly in the draft from the open door outside. The Tiber glides past, swollen, brown, treacherous, a silent conspirator with the storm clouds, ready to slip its banks with just a little more provocation. The merchant's eyes drift to it again and again, like watchers to an ill patient's breath, and you wonder how many nights like this held Rome's future hostage. How many lavish feasts, careful courtships, and subtle alliances hinged on wine arriving whole and sweet, not soured by damp, not shattered in mud, not stolen by hungry hands who cared nothing for senators' honor or poets' fragile moods. Night has truly fallen now, settling like a vast, dark cloak over the warehouses, the river, and the distant tiled rooftops of Rome. The air is cool and dense, carrying a damp heaviness that hints the rain may yet return before dawn. The faint scent of wet earth drifts in through the open doors, mingling with the sharper notes of resin and old wood inside. Most of the porters have departed, coins tucked safely into their belts, voices fading down the street with low laughter. That sounds relieved rather than merry. Within the warehouse, a softer quiet has claimed the rows of amphorae. Small oil lamps gutter in their wall niches, casting hesitant gold that pools on the stone floors and curls up the rounded bellies of clay jars, throwing fragile shadows that seem to breathe. Antonius makes his last slow round through the aisles, fingers trailing lightly over the cool curves of the amphorae. Now and then he taps one gently with his knuckles, listening for that faint, promising resonance that means the vessel is still sound. At a jar near the rear wall, one marked with a faint smudge of greenish mold at the base, he pauses longer. A frown knots his brow. Then he sighs, takes a small chip of wax from a pouch at his belt, and seals a hairline crack near the lip with practiced care. It may hold, he murmurs to himself, or it may split by sunrise. But so much of our hopes are just cracks we dare not press too hard upon. Near the entryway, his clerk Livius stacks the ledgers, binding them with a leather thong. His fingers are still smudged with ink from the afternoon's hasty corrections. When Antonius draws near, Livius glances up, voice low. "Shall I leave these at your villa tonight? If thieves break in," Antonius gives a small, tired laugh. "If thieves come, they'll find more worth in a handful of sound amphorae than in all my scrawls." Let the ledgers sleep here. Perhaps the silence will soothe their debts. They share a brief smile. In it lies the resigned camaraderie of men long accustomed to living at the edge of small disasters. At the far end of the warehouse, Decimus stands by the door to the upstairs storeroom. You watch him as he lifts a lamp to eye level, peering into the stacked rows of Falernian jars, now safely raised above the main floor. His expression is not proud, only quietly relieved. He sets the lamp down on a shelf with almost paternal care. Tomorrow, perhaps, the sun will favor us, he says to his steward, who waits nearby with folded hands. And if not, we have done what we could. The rest lies with gods, who never drank less for our prayers. His steward makes a respectful noise, half agreement, half gentle humor. Even Jupiter might pause at good wine, Dominus. It's we mortals who must pour it for him. A few moments later, Decimus steps outside to watch the river. You join him there under the shallow portico. The Tiber slides by in a dark, restless mass, whispering against the stone embankments. Bits of debris, a branch, a torn scrap of woven rush float past, catching and swirling in tiny whirlpools that fade almost as soon as they appear in the distance. A lantern bobs along the river road, likely carried by a watchman making his rounds. Its faint glow seems impossibly fragile against the enormity of the night. Decimus sighs. When I was a boy, he says softly, my father showed me this same river, said it carried Rome's fortunes from the hills to the sea. I thought he meant gold. I didn't understand he also meant wine and grain and oil, and all the tiny labors that keep a city breathing. He's quiet for a long moment, watching the water slip past. A storm upstream could change everything by morning, not just our profits, but the comfort of half the city. Who will sing poetry by lamplight if the cups run dry? Who will shake hands on delicate treaties if the table stands empty of even a modest jug? Back inside, the last lamps are being trimmed. Antonius's laborers move among the amphorae with small, careful steps, tightening straps and checking that the jars stand secure on their straw beds. One man pats the side of a vessel, almost affectionately, whispering a tiny phrase, part plea, part blessing, before stepping back into the shadows. At last Antonius gives a quiet signal. The wide doors are pulled shut, thick beams dropped into iron brackets to bar them against thieves, rats, or whatever storms might decide to come hunting. The clack of wood against stone echoes through the warehouse like a final punctuation. S. You stand there. The men gather near the entrance with their tiny circle of lamplight. No grand speeches are made. No grand speeches are needed. Just small nods, brief words of caution to each other about the rising river, about being watchful for footpads on the way home. Then they disperse into the damp night, cloaks pulled tight, leaving the warehouse to its quiet vigil. Antonius lingers a moment longer, hand on the doorframe, eyes scanning the rows of sealed jars. You see in his face a kind of gentle resignation, the look of a man who has long understood how little he truly controls, yet works each day anyway because that's what life in Rome demands. And you wonder how many mornings dawned on Rome's bright rooftops, bright only because men like these guarded clay and cork against careless rain. How many banquets sparkled, how many treaties softened over laughter and wine, all because a few humble merchants fretted through dark nights, fearing thunder more than any senator ever would. It is late morning in Rome, but the sky hangs low and heavy, pressing a thin gray drizzle into every street and courtyard. The air carries a chill that seeps easily through wool cloaks, settling in joints and sending older citizens to complain over cups of diluted wine. In these hours, the public baths, usually alive with laughter, argument, and splashing, are strangely subdued. You find yourself just inside the vestibule of the Thermae of Titus, one of many such bath complexes scattered across the city. The vast stone building breathes a damp warmth into the drizzle. Even here at the entrance, a faint steam curls up from deeper within, heavy with the mingled scents of mineral water, olive oil, and the ghost of old sweat. Marble floors stretch away under your feet, polished to a near gloss by countless sandaled visitors. Today, though, dark patches bloom here and there where wet footprints have left their mark. Attendants shuffle across them, carrying small rags or straw brooms, fussing like anxious birds over the spreading moisture. A young man named Publius, scarcely 20, with cheeks still holding the last traces of youthful roundness, hurries past you carrying a bucket. The water sloshes, dark with dirt and oil skimmed from the last cold plunge pool he tended. He mutters under his breath, something halfway between a curse and a prayer. As a drop from the ceiling splashes onto his bare arm, he empties the bucket into a drainage channel running along the wall. The channel is cleverly made, set slightly lower than the floor, guiding runoff into hidden pipes that carry it out of sight. But with so much extra rain these days, the drains labor under their burden, and Publius watches with mild dismay as the dirty water lingers before slipping away nearby. Another attendant, older and stooped from years of hefting amphory and kneeling to scrub marble, pauses to mop a puddle just forming at the base of a sculpted column. He leans heavily on his mop handle afterward, breathing through his mouth. When he notices your gaze, he offers a thin smile. "These rains," he says, voice rough with long hours in humid air, "they chase fewer people into the baths than you'd think. They worry more about catching chill from damp cloaks than they do about our warm pools, but those who come," he gestures toward the main hall, "they bring half the street with them on their sandals." You step deeper inside. The caldarium, the hot room, is farther off, a low humming promise of comfort, though fewer bodies steam in it today. Closer by, attendants rub down marble benches with stiff brushes. They pause often to wring out their cloths, black water trailing between their knuckles. A pair of boys wrestle clumsily near one wall, laughing until one slips on the slick floor and lands hard. The thump echoes. An attendant is there at once, hand on the boy's shoulder, half concern and half irritation. "You'll crack your head, and then your mother'll lay blame at my feet," he scolds. The boy grins, embarrassed, and scrambles upright, leaving a smudge of wet behind. At the far end of the room stands Lucius, the senior attendant. His tunic clings damply to his back. His arms are bare, knotted with old muscle. He watches everything: the boys, the slow drains, the flickering braziers that struggle against the creeping damp. A small cloth hangs at his belt, dark with repeated use. He catches your eye, gestures you over with a slight tilt of his head. "You see this?" he asks, pointing to a tiny crack threading its way through a tile. Rain and wet feet work their way in here, slow as ants but twice as clever. One day the tile splits, someone stumbles, breaks a wrist, then I answer to the magistrates for negligence. Lucius sighs, rubbing his palm over his scalp where hair has grown thin. "When I was a boy, I thought tending baths would mean laughter, songs, pretty patrons slipping me coins to oil their backs. Some days it is. Other days it's standing watch over water that would rather drown us all, catching slips before bones crack." His eyes drift toward a basin where two women murmur over small amphorae of scented oil. One gestures, laughing softly. and the other dabs a bit behind her ear. Lucius's face softens. Still, it is work that matters. Rome prides herself on order, on cleanliness. Let her temples shine and her streets teem, but if her baths foul or her citizens slip, we all pay. You move past Lucius, drawn by the warm hush of the caldarium. A thin steam ghosts over the surface of the pool there, ringed by modest lamps that glow gold in the dimness. A pair of older men soak up to their chests, eyes closed, heads tilted back. An attendant stands near them with a small copper pitcher, pouring warm water down cracks in the marble to keep algae from finding purchase. Even here, where patrons relax and the city's louder worries seem far away, you sense a fragile balance. The bath's serenity rests on countless small labors. The boy sweeping water back toward the drain. The girl wringing her rag again and again. Lucius running a hand along every tile to feel for fresh splits. And you wonder, how often did Rome's famed composure, her reputation for civility and poise, depend not on generals or poets, but on men and women who spent their days chasing stray drops before they turned to slick danger. How many proud citizens left here praising Rome's grandeur, never realizing it was humble attendants who spared them shame or hurt. The day advances, though it's hard to tell by the sky outside. The drizzle never quite leaves, only shifts. From a faint silver mist to a heavier patter that echoes faintly in the vaulted ceiling. Inside, lamps have been lit along the walls, turning the baths into a world of warm, golden puddles, each lamp's reflection rippling across the damp marble floors. The baths begin to fill now. Perhaps the chill of the drizzle has finally convinced more Romans to brave wet streets for the promise of hot water and massage oils. Citizens trickle in by twos and threes, shedding damp cloaks at the vestibule where younger attendants lay them carefully over racks. Even so, tiny rivulets still escape, running from sodden hems to pool across the tiles. Publius, the young attendant you first noticed, scurries along these puddles with his mop and a practiced half-bend of his knees, guiding the water to the small grated drains. His lips move as he counts under his breath, perhaps a tiny charm against the endless labor. At the edge of the tepidarium, the warm room, a knot of men gather. They stand talking low over half-shaved cheeks as another attendant scrapes a blunt strigil down one man's leg, collecting oil and sweat into a shallow bronze pan. The oil is darker than usual. The damp has slowed circulation, left skin sluggish, less willing to flush clean. You scrape too hard, young man, the bather complains, flinching. Better a sharp scrape now than a lingering itch later. The attendant answers without looking up. There's a wry affection in it, the sort that comes from long practice with demanding clients who will tomorrow thank him for saving them a rash dot nearby. Another group plays at tossing small ivory knuckle bones across a folded tunic. They wager, with copper coins, laughing in bursts that echo through the chamber. But every few moments, one leans to wipe a hand on the stone bench. Moisture slickens, even the dice game, threatening to turn fortune's roll into a slip that might end a playful afternoon poorly. In the main hall, Lucius oversees everything with the measured calm of a veteran. You watch him pause by a brazier to warm his hands, then move to a young woman who's been tasked with keeping the oil urns clean. She's fussing at a stubborn crust of old residue that clings inside the lip of a jar. Use more sand, Lucius advises gently. Let it sit with a little hot water. It'll loosen in time. Hard work's good, but clever patience spares your wrists tomorrow. She nods, cheeks pink, either from embarrassment or the steam that curls from the nearby pools. A sudden commotion draws both your attention. Near the cold plunge pool, A heavyset man has tried to stand too quickly. His foot slips on an almost invisible film of water and oil left by careless patrons. His arms wheel, voice catching in a startled bark. For a heartbeat, the entire hall seems to lurch with him. Then an attendant darts forward, catching him under one arm, bracing his hip with practiced precision. "Steady, citizen, steady there," the attendant murmurs. The man breathes hard, nods, then lets out a shaky laugh. "Felt like the gods themselves yanked me backward." Lucius arrives an instant later, eyeing the spot. He kneels, running 2 fingers along the tile. When they come away shiny, he shakes his head. "Publius," he calls. The young man jogs over with his mop. Together they work, Lucius pouring a little fine ash from a small pouch, Publius working it across the slick surface until the sheen fades and the tile grips again. They do it quickly, quietly, as if patching a hole in Rome's very dignity. By the time the heavy man passes that way again, there's only a faint dusting left, and his feet find sure purchase. Elsewhere, small conversations bloom. One bather complains of the cold damp settling into his knee, swearing that last year's winter left it ruined. A pair of older women soak their feet in a shallow basin, discussing a neighbor's scandal, something about borrowed silver that never returned, punctuated with little gasps and laughter. The attendants move among them like caretakers in a delicate garden, guiding each story along with nods, small reassurances. A towel laid just so across chilled shoulders. Later, you see Lucius pause by the entrance, where cloaks and sandals have been neatly laid out on low benches. He picks up a sandal, examining the leather thong that holds it together. It's frayed, nearly snapped. Without a word, he sets it aside, calling one of the boys to fetch a scrap of leather from their storage. "We'll mend this before the owner leaves," he says quietly. A broken strap on a slick street sends good men into the mud, breaks arms, or worse, pride. The boy nods solemnly, as if entrusted with the empire's very balance. It strikes you then how so much of Rome's vaunted poise, the calm faces, the languid walks across marble floors, rests on hands like Lucius's, on a boy patching a sandal strap, on Publius chasing down stray puddles before they bloom into hazards. Even the gossip, the warm soaks, the gentle jokes, all stand on this unnoticed bedrock of careful, constant attention. And you wonder how many patricians strutted through forums the next day, never knowing they owed their confident stride to an old attendant's handful of ash or a boy's quick swipe of a mop. How many fragile threads of pride and power were daily saved from shattering by such humble, watchful hands. Night settles slowly over the city, and inside the baths, the air seems to shift, gives way to cooler currents that drift in through high windows left slightly ajar. The drizzle outside has dwindled to a delicate mist, so fine it appears more like a veil than rain. You stand quietly by the vestibule, watching as the last few patrons depart. They leave in pairs or threes, voices hushed now by the hour, cloaks gathered tight around still damp shoulders. A few stop to press coins into attendants' hands, a small tip for care taken, a nod to humble stewardship. Lucius accepts each with a shallow bow, his expression neither servile nor proud, simply grateful, simply tired. Inside the great marble halls begin to empty. Echoes carry differently now. Footsteps sound sharper. Conversations fade sooner. Lamps flicker along the walls, their small flames mirrored in polished tile. Every so often, one Goddard wick hisses out, sending a faint coil of dark smoke toward the vaulted ceiling. Publius stands near the edge of the tepidarium, leaning lightly on his mop. A smear of ash still darkens one of his cheeks, missed in earlier attempts to wipe sweat from his brow. Nearby, the young woman who cleaned oil earns rubs at her wrists, flexing stiff fingers. Their eyes meet, and a small grin passes between them. Not flirtation exactly, more the gentle relief of shared weariness after long hours keeping others from harm. At the far end of the room, Lucius crouches by a drain. His broad hand moves over the metal grate, testing that water still slips down freely. A tiny blockage here, a few stray hairs, perhaps a dropped pin from some patrician's cloak, and by morning the basin could be half flooded. He clears it with a thin iron pick, then sits back on his heels with a soft grunt. When he straightens, he looks around the hall as if seeing it truly for the first time that day. His gaze moves over marble benches, worn smooth by countless hours of idle gossip, over the faint pink veins in the stone floors, damp, still clinging in narrow rivulets, over the lamps, each pool of gold holding the dark at bay by mere inches. A low laugh drifts across the room. Publius and the young woman stand together now, watching a small dark beetle attempt to scuttle across the slick floor. It struggles, legs skittering this way and that on the polished surface. Finally, it rights itself, disappearing into a narrow crack near the wall. Even the bugs slip in this place, Publius murmurs. The girl snorts, shoulders shaking with quiet amusement. Lucius hears them, smiles faintly, and lets the moment pass without rebuke. After all, even caretakers deserve a thin thread of humor woven through long, damp hours. Gradually, the attendants move through the chambers, snuffing lamps one by one. Each little sigh of extinguished flame seems to draw the shadows closer, until the baths lie mostly in cool dimness, lit only by a few tiny watch lamps left by doorways. The marble underfoot grows muted, less a bright floor than a soft gray sea that vanishes at the edges into darkness. Lucius checks the final doors, ensuring each latch holds. His palm presses flat against one wooden panel, feeling for any tremor of damp seeping through. Satisfied, he nods, gestures for the others to gather their buckets, cloths, the small copper strigil pans still bearing faint whirls of scraped oil. They drift toward the vestibule together, bodies moving with that slow, measured fatigue born of honest labor. Outside, the city waits rain-streaked streets, distant laughter spilling from a tavern, perhaps the lonely hollow sound of a fruit seller's cart returning late to some cramped insula before stepping out into the cool night. Lucius pauses. He looks back at the wide chamber they've left behind. Even empty, it holds an air of gentle expectation, as if tomorrow's voices already breathe faintly through the silence. He draws a slow breath, shoulders lifting, then releases it in a long sigh that carries more relief than weariness. "You'd not think it," he says softly, half to his young crew and half to the echoing room itself, "but all Rome struts. On these stones, let the floors shine and the baths stay clean. And a merchant believes himself near a senator. Let the marble foul or the water sour, and every man remembers just how small he is." Publius nods, though his eyes are already half closed. The girl beside him hugs her rag to her chest like a tired talisman. They step out together into the night. The drizzle has thinned almost to nothing now, just tiny droplets that catch in the low lantern light and spark like brief stars. Rome stretches away in shadow and gold, alleys dark as secrets, windows glowing where evening meals linger. Lucius pulls the door closed behind them with a careful hand. The latch clicks home, not loudly, but with a quiet finality that seems to seal not just wood, but all the small, tender labors of the day inside. And you wonder How many grand orations, how many whispered intrigues, leaned unknowing on the silent dignity of men like Lucius. How many citizens walked home by torchlight, feeling unassailable in Roman grandeur, never guessing it was held aloft by attendants chasing puddles, smoothing oil jars, and mending cracks in the floor, long after voices faded from the marble halls. It is early afternoon in Rome, though you'd hardly know it by the sun. The sky hangs low, heavy with the same bruised gray that has lingered for days, squeezing out a thin, steady rain that beads on every tiled roof and gathers in the worn seams of stone streets. You stand at the edge of a narrow lane in the Suburra, a tangled district of workshops and crowded insulae where voices rise up through wooden balconies draped with laundry that now sags under the damp. From open windows drifts the warm tang of boiled lentils, the sharper bite of vinegar wine. But beneath it all is the cleaner scent of rain-slick stone and wet dust, freshened by the restless water that runs everywhere. Down this sloping lane, a shallow gutter channels the rain into a playful little torrent. It bubbles over bits of broken tile, carves tiny eddies around loose pebbles, then slips away beneath a row of stacked amphorae waiting by a shop. For most adults, it's an inconvenience at best, something to step over or curse when it splashes mud on new sandals. But today, it's a river of grand adventure for a cluster of children gathered at its banks. There are 4 of them at first. 2 boys with close-cropped hair, a girl whose wool tunic hangs a little too long, and a smaller boy trailing along behind. They crowd close to the gutter, feet braced on damp cobbles, eyes bright with the quiet thrill of claiming this bit of Rome for their own private amusement. One of the boys kneels, carefully lowering a tiny boat into the rushing water. It's hardly more than a scrap of bark whittled on the underside to give it some shape, with a ragged sliver of linen poked through as a proud mast. It catches the gutter's current at once, bobbing and spinning before steadying into a determined glide down the lane. The children give chase with squeals of delight. They dance along beside their tiny vessel, hopping over muddy ruts and splashing heedlessly through shallower patches. A woman passing by shakes her head, tutting as droplets scatter onto the hem of her cloak. By Venus mirror, soaked to the bone and sick by tomorrow, she mutters, though there's no real heat in it. A faint smile tugs at her mouth despite herself, perhaps remembering her own childhood races down rain-fed streams. At the next bend in the street, another pair of children joins in. They've been squatting under an awning, sheltering from the drizzle, but the sight of the makeshift boat is too much temptation. Soon they've found their own, a small hollowed piece of fig wood, darker from repeated dunkings, but still riding. High and proud, they launch it with a ceremonious push, whooping as it catches up to the first dot. You follow along, stepping carefully to avoid the deeper puddles. The children care nothing for such precautions. Their feet are caked in fine grit and little rivulets of brown water. They whoop and shout encouragement to their tiny vessels as if they were galleys racing for triumph in the Circus Maximus. Faster, mine's faster, cries one of the boys, nearly tripping in his excitement. No, look, it's stuck. The girl points, hands clapped to her mouth. Sure enough, the bark boat has nudged against a bit of straw lodged near the gutter's edge. The current pushes it sideways, spinning helplessly until the little boy who launched it drops to his knees. He reaches out, careful fingers nudging it free. The others laugh and clap, relief bright on their faces as the boat wobbles once and then surges forward again. Near a doorway, an older man in a patched cloak stands watching. His face is lined, the sort that looks carved by many seasons, laughter, worry, long sun, and now long rain. He holds a basket of damp herbs against his hip. When he catches your eye, he gives a small shrug and says, almost better they chase water now than wine later. Rome's streets see enough fools groan. You nod, and together you watch the children dash after their tiny champions. The lane rings with their shrill laughter, bouncing off wet walls and startling a pair of doves from a nearby windowsill. Their wings beat upward in a startled flutter, showering droplets down like a miniature rain, all their own, at the end of the block. The gutter disappears beneath a low archway, vanishing into the dark, where runoff collects before joining the wider sewers that snake unseen beneath Rome. The children gather there, peering into the gloom, voices hushed as if the tunnel's mouth might swallow more than their boats. Then the smallest boy gasps, pointing. There, it went right in. Brave little ship. They stand for a moment longer, straining to see, as if hoping it might bob back out again. But the tunnel offers only a faint, echoing drip, swallowing bark and linen and all their bright hopes for another moment of racing. And you wonder how many of Rome's days were sweetened by such tiny spectacles, children chasing rain rivers, hearts untroubled by taxes, decrees, or distant wars. How often did these gutter games stitch small, unrecorded joys into the sprawling fabric of the empire, holding it together far better than all the legions ever could. The children linger at the mouth of the gutter tunnel longer than you'd expect. They crowd close, peering into the dim, damp archway as though hoping for a miracle, that their tiny vessels might somehow reverse course and emerge victorious, lifted by some secret swirl of water. But soon enough, reality and curiosity nudges them onward. One of the older boys picks up a broken reed from the gutter's edge, prodding the shallow water that still burbles along the stones. Another girl, hair plastered in damp curls to her forehead, points farther down the street. There's another stream past the butcher's lane. It's deeper, better for racing. The others brighten instantly. As one, they scamper off, feet slapping through shallow puddles, leaving behind only a few swirling scraps of straw and the faint echo of their laughter